What happens when a usually calm, guarded, and soft-spoken Robert Pattinson steps onto The View expecting a routine promotional interview, only to end up in a fiery, unexpected clash with Whoopi Goldberg that no one, not the audience, not the producers, not even Robert himself, saw coming. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to Stage View and like and comment right now, because what unfolds next is one of the most intense daytime TV moments ever captured on camera, and you'll want to be here every time we break down Hollywood's biggest confrontations. It began with an atmosphere that felt deceptively normal. The cameras hadn't even started rolling yet when Robert Pattinson stepped onto the set. The studio lights bathed the stage in that bright, almost surreal glow that always made him feel like he'd stepped into a place halfway between reality and fiction. There was a murmur of excitement from the audience, most of them clearly diehard fans, with posters and handwritten signs tucked into their laps, waiting for the moment he would sit down. Robert smiled politely, the controlled, reserved kind of smile he'd perfected over the years. Warm enough to look genuine, distant enough to protect his inner world. He took his seat at the edge of the curved table, his fingers resting lightly against the glossy surface as he adjusted his jacket. The hosts were still offstage finishing notes, but the audience's whispered anticipation filled the room like static. He didn't know why, but something felt slightly off. A tension, thin, invisible, but unmistakably there. He exhaled softly, trying to release it. He'd done hundreds of interviews. This was nothing new. But then he heard it, the unmistakable voice of Whoopi Goldberg, carrying her usual dry humor as she joked with the stage manager while walking toward the table. "You know, if he sparkles in real life, I might need sunglasses," she quipped, loud enough for some audience members to giggle. Robert's smile froze just a little. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't unusual. But it was the kind of joke he thought he'd left behind years ago. He swallowed it down. Let it go. The rest of the panel, Sunny Hostin, Joy Behar, and Sarah Haynes, filtered in, greeting him warmly. But Whoopi? Whoopi simply nodded, her expression unreadable, searching him in a way that made him feel more exposed than the lights ever could. "Ready," the producer called. The countdown began. 3. Robert straightened in his seat. 2. The audience hushed. 1. The theme music faded, and the show opened live. Whoopi led the intro with her standard grounded authority, but there was something in her voice, a firmness, a slight edge, that suggested she had her own plan for this interview, one that might not align with what Robert had been prepped for. "We're joined today by a man who has gone from teen heartthrob to one of the most unexpected and daring actors of our generation," Whoopi said, turning toward him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Robert Pattinson is here to talk about his new project, but I have a feeling there's a whole lot more to discuss." The audience cheered loudly, but the tone of her last words wrapped itself around Robert like a cold hand. A whole lot more. He laughed lightly, trying to diffuse whatever she was hinting at. "Well, hopefully all of it's good." Joy jumped in with her typical warmth. "It is good. I saw the movie, very dark, very artistic, very." Robert Pattinson. More laughter. Things seemed normal again. Robert relaxed slightly, but then Whoopi leaned forward. "So, Robert, I want to start with something you said recently. In an interview, you mentioned that you sometimes feel like Hollywood, and I'm quoting you, puts labels on you can't seem to escape." Robert nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think a lot of actors feel that. It's not a complaint, just an observation." "But isn't it," Whoopi said, "kind of a privileged observation?" The room tightened instantly. Robert blinked. I'm not sure what you mean." "Well," Whoopi continued, gesturing with her hand, "you grew up in a world where you became internationally famous at, 22? You had millions of fans, global recognition, and massive success. So what exactly are these labels that are so hard for you to escape? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like those labels paid you pretty well." A few people in the audience gave awkward laughs, those nervous, unsure ones that come from watching something you can't tell is serious or playful. Robert's posture stiffened. He wasn't used to pushback this early. Not like this, and especially not from someone he respected. "I'm not saying I wasn't fortunate," Robert replied carefully. "I just meant that sometimes roles stick to you, and you're always fighting to show that you're more than one thing." "That's everyone," Whoopi shot back. "Every actor in this town. Every person in this industry. So why does it sound like you think your struggle is special?" Sunny attempted to interject gently. "Whoopi, I think he's just talking about." But Whoopi raised her hand for her to stop. And for the first time, Robert's eyes sharpened. He wasn't angry yet, but he felt the shift inside him, the slow, unexpected rise of something he rarely allowed to surface, irritation. He leaned slightly forward, steadying his voice. With respect, I don't think I said anything that implied my experience was unique or more difficult than anyone else's. I was speaking honestly about how careers evolve. Whoopi nodded, but her expression challenged him. Right, your career evolved. Because you had the luxury to choose projects. Not everyone does. Robert felt something simmer inside him, unpleasant, unexpected. Are you saying, he replied, that because I had success early on, I'm not allowed to talk about the challenges of navigating my career? I'm saying, Whoopi countered, that maybe focusing on your struggle while sitting in your position isn't the best look. The air thickened. Sarah and Joy exchanged quick, uneasy glances. Sunny looked down at her notes, and the audience stayed silent. Robert didn't look away. I wasn't talking about struggle. I was talking about growth. Feels the same, Whoopi said. It's not, he replied, his tone lower now. A subtle wave of murmurs rolled through the audience. A camera operator stiffened, unsure where to point the lens. Robert inhaled slowly, grounding himself, trying not to escalate it. But something about Whoopi's approach felt unfair, twisting his words into something he didn't intend. He lifted his hands slightly, palms open. If I came off a certain way, I'm happy to clarify. I'm not asking for clarification, Whoopi interrupted, voice firm. I'm asking for accountability. You have a massive platform. Millions listen to everything you say. You talk about labels being a burden. Do you know how many actors would kill to have a label, any label, because they can't get work? Robert's jaw tightened. This wasn't interpretation. This was accusation. Whoopi, he said quietly but with evident restraint, I don't think you're being fair. Oh, I'm being very fair, she said. I'm asking you to think about how your words land. Joy leaned forward urgently. Maybe we should talk about the movie before we dive too deep into this. But Whoopi's eyes never left Robert. And Robert, finally losing some of that famously controlled composure, leaned forward as well. His voice didn't rise, but his energy changed. It sharpened, focused like a blade. No, he said. Let's talk about this. Because you're suggesting I'm complaining about success. And I'm not. I'm talking about artistic identity. I'm talking about trying to grow as an actor. That's not privilege, that's craft. The audience gasped softly. Whoopi lifted her chin. Craft? So your discomfort with being boxed in as a heartthrob is a burden now? It's not a burden, Robert replied sharply. It's a limitation I've worked hard to break. And you did break it, Whoopi fired back. So what's the issue now? The issue, Robert said, his voice firm, is that you're twisting my words into something they're not. You're making assumptions. And they're unfair. A hush fell so hard you could hear the air conditioning hum. Whoopi's eyebrows rose in challenge. Oh, and what assumptions do you think I'm making, Robert? The way she said his name, slow, deliberate, sent a chill through him. Not threatening, but challenging him to step forward into the tension instead of retreating from it. Robert took a breath, held it, released it. Then he spoke. That I'm disconnected. That I don't understand how the industry works. That I don't appreciate where I am. And none of that is true. Whoopi didn't blink. Then say what you meant without the self-pity. Robert's eyes flashed. There was no self-pity, he said. That was the moment the audience reacted. An audible wave of gasps, whispers, even a few cheers from fans who clearly felt protective of him. Joy reached across the table. Okay, let's take a breath. But neither of them looked away. Neither blinked. Neither backed down. And for the first time in his career, Robert Pattinson let his guard slip. Not in an outburst, but in a rare, raw spark of emotion the world almost never sees from him. The tension in the studio grew so intense it felt physical, as if the air itself was charged. And deep in that silence, one thing was painfully clear. This interview was no longer about promotion. It was personal, and it was only the beginning. Something shifted in the studio after that moment. Subtle yet undeniable, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. Even the audience, who moments earlier were buzzing with excitement, sat frozen in a state between shock and awe. They weren't watching an interview anymore. They were witnessing a confrontation build itself from the ground up, layer by layer, emotion by emotion. Robert held his gaze on Whoopi, trying to steady the thrum of adrenaline coursing through him. He wasn't someone who liked conflict. His entire career had been built on avoiding it, sidestepping drama, steering clear of controversy, maintaining a controlled distance from anything messy. But something about this, about being misunderstood in real time, on a public stage, hit him in a place he rarely revealed. Whoopi leaned back at last, crossing her arms and letting out a soft, humorless chuckle. You know, Robert, I've done this show for a long time. And I've sat across from actors who've had everything handed to them and still complained. I'm trying to understand what category you fall into. The audience reacted again, another low ripple of murmurs. Some frowned, others leaned forward, already sensing that this wasn't a comment Robert could absorb quietly. He forced himself not to react too quickly. He knew that if he snapped, even a little, it would spiral. I fall into the category of people who take their jobs seriously, he said, voice even but cold around the edges. People who want to grow and evolve without being mocked for it. Whoopi's eyebrows rose slightly, the closest she'd come to looking surprised. Joy interjected, nervous laughter in her voice. Okay, we're getting a little heated, and we have a whole show. But Whoopi spoke over her, eyes still locked on Robert. Nobody's mocking you. I'm challenging you. There's a difference. There's also a difference, Robert replied, between a challenge and an attack. Sunny cleared her throat gently. Robert, I think what Whoopi is trying to ask is. No, he understands what I'm asking, Whoopi said. He just doesn't like the way it sounds. Robert's jaw flexed. A familiar tension pushed at the back of his throat. An instinct to defend, to justify, to break through whatever barrier had suddenly formed between them. I've worked for everything I have, he said quietly. Even the things people think were handed to me. I auditioned like everyone else. I fought typecasting. I fought public perception. I fought being put in a box I didn't choose. Lots of people fight that, Whoopi countered. And I'm one of them, Robert said sharply. A few people in the audience clapped instinctively, then stopped when they realized how serious the moment felt. Sarah finally stepped in. Let's just take a second. Robert, you're talking about your artistic identity. Whoopi is talking about the broader industry. Maybe the point is. But the attempt at mediation fizzled instantly as Whoopi leaned forward again, her voice calm but weighted. Robert, when you've been in this industry for decades, you realize that sometimes the things actors complain about aren't struggles. They're inconveniences. Robert's eyes narrowed only slightly, but enough that the camera caught it. And when you've lived your entire adult life being torn apart publicly for things outside your control, he said, measured and slow, what some people call a complaint is actually someone trying to reclaim their narrative. Whoopi let out a breath that wasn't quite a sigh. Then say that. Say you want control. Don't pretend you're the victim of the system. The word victim hit him harder than expected. He stared at her, almost stunned. I didn't say I was a victim. You implied it. No, he said, his voice suddenly firmer than it had been all morning. You interpreted it that way. The studio fell into another hush. Joy looked helplessly between them, her hands flat on the table. Can we please talk about the film? But neither of them looked away from each other. Robert felt heat building in his chest, but it wasn't anger he recognized. It was frustration, a kind that curled itself around his ribs like a tightening rope. Why was she coming after him like this? Why was she twisting his words? Why was she pushing so hard? And beneath all that, why did it matter to him so much? Whoopi tapped her fingers against the table, a small gesture, but intentional. Let me ask you something else then, she said. Do you think fame has made you lose perspective? Robert blinked slowly. No. Really? Really, he repeated. Because a lot of people think it has. Who? Robert challenged, before he could stop himself. People who watch you, Whoopi replied, shrugging. People who think you talk about fame like it's a curse. I've never said that, Robert shot back. Ever. You've said it feels restrictive. That's not the same thing. It sounds similar. It's not. Sunny leaned toward him gently. Robert, can you explain what you mean by restrictive? Yes, he said immediately, directing his answer at Sunny instead. Restriction in terms of creative opportunity. When you're known for one type of role, it can take years, to convince people you can do something else. You have to fight for the flexibility to explore. Whoopi cut in again. You got that flexibility. So why bring it up now? Robert laughed, once short, humorless. Because I was asked. And there it was, the first real shift in momentum. The audience murmured in agreement, some even clapping again. A few fans cheered under their breath. Whoopi's lips pressed together just slightly. But Robert wasn't done. And because, he continued, it's honest. Because I'm allowed to talk about the challenges I faced without being told I'm ungrateful. Whoopi didn't flinch, but her tone cooled further. Nobody's calling you ungrateful. You implied it. She opened her mouth, but Robert kept going. In fact, he said, everything you've said since this interview started has been framed like I should apologize for having a career. And that's not what I said, Whoopi interrupted. No, Robert said, but it's what you're suggesting. The studio audience was now fully engaged, shifting in their seats, whispering, leaning to the edge of their chairs. They weren't just watching, they were invested. Two powerful personalities, two completely different communication styles, colliding on live TV in real time. Joy muttered under her breath. Oh boy. Sarah whispered. This is getting out of hand. Sunny exhaled, her voice calm but strained. Maybe we can reset. Robert suddenly pushed back his chair slightly, not standing, but shifting enough to create a noticeable pause. He rubbed his palms against his thighs and let out a frustrated breath he couldn't contain anymore. You know what? He said softly. I'll be very clear. I am grateful. I'm extremely grateful. But gratitude doesn't erase difficulty. It doesn't erase expectation. It doesn't erase the pressure to constantly reinvent yourself while people judge every move. His voice had emotion in it now, real, unfiltered emotion that the audience felt instantly. I'm allowed to talk about that, he added. I'm allowed to acknowledge the complexities of my career. And if that's seen as complaining, then maybe people aren't really listening. The room pulsed with silence. For a moment, just a moment, Whoopi looked as though she might soften. But then she exhaled slowly, tapped the table again, and said, Fair. Then let me ask you this. Why does it bother you so much what people think? You're an actor, not a surgeon, not a politician. You're not saving lives. You're entertaining them. The audience reacted again, this time sharply. Some gasped. Others murmured in disbelief. Robert went still, completely still. His eyes darkened, the muscles in his jaw tightening visibly as he processed her words. And then, he leaned forward, slow, deliberate, unblinking. That, he said quietly, is incredibly dismissive. Whoopi didn't look away. It's realistic. No, Robert corrected, it's reductive. Joy raised both hands as if pleading with invisible gods. Can we please cut to a commercial? But they were rolling live. The tension was rolling live. And Robert wasn't backing off. You know, he continued, voice now lower, steadier. I've never claimed to save lives. But film, art, storytelling, these things matter. They shape people. They move people. They give people escape when they need it, and comfort when they can't find it anywhere else. Whoopi didn't interrupt. Robert went on. So when you say I shouldn't care what people think because I'm just entertaining them, that ignores the entire point of what we do. You can call it entertainment. But to the people who connect with it, it's more than that. The audience erupted in applause. Real loud, emotional applause. For the first time that morning, Robert didn't look uncomfortable with it. He didn't shrink back or attempt to calm the room. He let the moment stand. Let his words hang above them like a challenge thrown back across the table. Whoopi nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. You're passionate. I respect that. Robert stared at her, waiting. But passion, she added, doesn't mean you get to be above criticism. I never said I was above criticism, he replied instantly. You act like it, Whoopi countered. How? He demanded. By getting defensive. Because you're accusing me of things I didn't say. And I'm asking you to clarify. And I have clarified. The table shook slightly as Whoopi shifted forward. And I'm saying your clarification still sounds privileged. Robert's eyes widened. That was it, the moment something inside him snapped. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't raise his voice. But he said something he rarely allowed himself to say. Not publicly, not privately, not ever. You don't know a thing about my life. The studio froze. Whoopi blinked once. Robert continued, voice steady but blazing underneath. You see the movies. You see the red carpets. You see the headlines. But you don't see what's behind any of it. The pressure. The fear. The anxiety. The expectations. The constant public judgment. The loss of privacy. The loss of control. The loss of normalcy. So don't sit there and tell me what my life is or isn't. His breath trembled. Not loudly, but enough for the microphone to catch it. The audience was dead silent. Sunny looked stricken. Joy looked horrified. Sarah looked like she might cry. Whoopi simply held her gaze steady on him. I know enough, she said softly, to know when someone hasn't checked their privilege before speaking. Robert shook his head slowly, disbelief flooding through him. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, but sharp as a splinter, "You're wrong." A long, aching silence filled the air. Finally, Whoopi leaned back, arms still crossed, eyes still locked on him. "We'll see," she said. And that single sentence ignited another round of gasps. Robert stared at her, stunned. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a confrontation neither could step back from. The cameras stayed trained on them. The tension kept building. And the audience, still silent, waited, knowing instinctively that what was coming next would change everything. The silence after Whoopi's "we'll see" didn't just linger. It expanded, thickening the air like fog rolling across a battlefield moments before the clash. It was the kind of silence that makes people instinctively hold their breath, unsure whether they should brace for an explosion or a collapse. Robert sat frozen, every muscle tightened, eyes locked on Whoopi's face as if searching for the meaning behind her words. Was it a threat? A warning? A challenge? Or had she simply reached her limit with him too? Whatever it was, Robert felt it like a strike against his chest. Joy tugged at her cue cards, glancing desperately at the stage manager off camera. Sarah's fingers nervously laced together in her lap. Sunny's expression softened with worry. But Whoopi, she remained still, composed, unmoving. The producers were gesturing wildly from behind the cameras, but the director didn't dare cut away. Not when the tension was reaching a crescendo unlike anything the show had seen in years. Robert inhaled slowly, trying to ground himself, but the frustration, the disbelief, the sting of being publicly misunderstood, it was all still burning hot beneath his ribs. Finally, he spoke. "What exactly do you mean by that?" he asked quietly. "We'll see." Whoopi didn't blink. "I mean, we'll see if your perspective changes when you step outside of yourself for a minute." Robert let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a gasp of disbelief. "Outside of myself?" "Yes," Whoopi repeated, her tone steady, borderline parental. "Outside of your bubble." The word bubble struck him harder than expected. "Wow," he said, rubbing a hand across his jaw before dropping it onto the table. "Is that really how you see me? Is that not how you see yourself?" Whoopi countered. The audience winced collectively. It wasn't loud, but the discomfort rippled through the room like a shifting tide. "No," Robert said firmly. "It's not." "Then tell me," Whoopi said, folding her arms tighter. "What part of your life looks like the average person's? Because most people don't get to pick roles based on artistic expression. Most people don't get to reinvent themselves for fun. They go to work, they pay bills, they raise families, they survive. So when an artist," she emphasized the word with a slight tilt of her head, "talks about being restricted, some people find that hard to swallow." Robert closed his eyes for half a second, one deliberate moment of restraint, before opening them again. "Are you telling me I'm not allowed to talk about my experience because someone else has it worse?" "No," Whoopi said. "I'm telling you to put things in perspective." Robert leaned forward, eyes narrowing, voice low and steady. "And I'm telling you it's not your job to measure my pain against someone else's." That sentence hit the room like a thunderclap. Whoopi's expression hardened, but not with anger, with something deeper, something personal. Sunny jumped in, sensing the escalation. "Robert, I think what Whoopi is trying to communicate is that platforms matter. Words matter. And when people hear you talk about limitations, they might feel. They might feel what?" Robert snapped, not at Sunny, but at the situation. "They might feel I don't understand their struggles. They don't know me. I'm not pretending my life is their life. I'm simply speaking to my own experience." Whoopi leaned in. "And I'm speaking to irresponsibility." Robert froze. The word echoed across the table, sharp and merciless. "Excuse me?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "You heard me," Whoopi said, her tone unwavering. "Irresponsibility in the way you talk about your career. Irresponsibility in the way you frame your challenges." Robert's hands clenched together on the table, knuckles pale. "That's unfair," he said. "It's real," she replied. "It's biased," he shot back. Now that got a reaction. A ripple of shock rolled through the audience. Joy gasped. Sarah's eyes widened. Even Sunny's posture stiffened. Whoopi's eyes narrowed. "Biased?" "Yes," Robert said. "You came into this interview with an opinion already formed about me. And every question you've asked hasn't been a question. It's been an accusation." "That's not true," Whoopi said sharply. "It is," he insisted. "You didn't come here to have a conversation. You came here to lecture me." "Oh, please," Whoopi scoffed. "If I wanted to lecture you, you'd know it." Robert gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Really? Because that's exactly what's happening." The audience murmured louder now, their discomfort shifting into fascination. People were leaning forward, eyes wide, phones discreetly recording even though they knew they weren't supposed to. This wasn't daytime TV anymore. This was a live emotional collision. Sonny reached across the table slightly. "Robert, let's just redirect." "No," Robert said, voice still controlled but undeniably shaken. "I'm trying to understand why I'm being attacked for speaking vulnerably about something. I'm not dismissing anyone else's experience. I'm not saying my life is harder than anyone's. I'm talking about artistic identity. That's it. And I'm asking you," Whoopi countered, "to recognize the privilege of even having that conversation." Robert's patience snapped, not explosively, but like a thin rope finally giving way after too much strain. "You keep saying that word," he said. "Privilege. As if it makes every emotion I have invalid." "It doesn't invalidate it," Whoopi said, "but it puts it into context." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You're using it as a weapon." Whoopi opened her mouth, stunned for the first time. Robert continued before she could respond. "You're using it to silence me, to shame me, to tell me that because my life looks a certain way from the outside, I'm not allowed to express anything that isn't convenient or flattering." "That's not what I'm doing," Whoopi said slowly. "Yes, it is," he said. "And it's not fair." The table fell into a heavy silence. Robert's voice softened, but the emotion in it cut deeper than any raised tone ever could. "You don't know what it cost me to reinvent my career. You don't know the sleepless nights. You don't know the anxiety. You don't know the depression. You don't know the public humiliation during the worst moments of my life. You don't know the weight of millions of people judging your face, your voice, your every flaw. So don't tell me I've never struggled. Don't tell me I've never had to fight." For the first time, Whoopi looked taken aback. Just slightly, but enough that anyone watching closely would have caught it. Sonny sat back slowly, eyes glistening. Joy looked down, troubled. Sarah pressed her lips together, visibly emotional. The audience was dead silent. Robert's voice trembled again, just once, before he forced it steady. "You think I don't know privilege? I do. I'm not denying it. But I'm allowed to have feelings. I'm allowed to talk about the pressures of my own life without being told I'm wrong to feel them." Whoopi stared at him. Really stared. And Robert stared back, his breath unsteady, his posture tense, his emotions laid bare for the entire world to see. The silence stretched so long that it felt like time had stopped. Finally, quietly, Whoopi spoke. "I hear you." The room let out a collective breath. Robert's shoulders dropped a fraction, exhausted. But the conversation was still far from over. "Good," he said softly. "But," Whoopi added, leaning forward again, "you also need to hear this." The audience tensed again. "While you're fighting to break out of a label," she said, "some people are fighting just to be seen. At all. So when you speak, especially with the influence you have to think about how it sounds." Robert nodded slowly. "I do think about it." "Not enough," she replied. Something inside him flickered, hurt maybe. Frustration. Confusion. Respect tangled with resentment. "You want me to be accountable," Robert said. "Fine. But be accountable too." The audience gasped again. Whoopi's eyes narrowed slightly. "Accountable for what?" "For assuming the worst of me," Robert said. "For deciding before I opened my mouth that you already had me figured out." Whoopi inhaled sharply. "You didn't come into this conversation with curiosity," Robert continued. "You came in with judgment." Even Joy was speechless now. Whoopi opened her mouth, ready to respond, but before she could, a stage manager called out urgently. "We need to go to commercial." The director shouted, 5 seconds. "We're going to break." But the cameras were still rolling. 4 seconds. Robert and Whoopi stared at each other, both breathing hard, both visibly affected, both holding more emotion than they'd intended to show. 3 seconds. The hosts shifted awkwardly, some looking at the camera, others at their notes. 2 seconds. The audience waited, silent, tense, on the edge of their seats. 1 second. And just before the cut to commercial, Whoopi said quietly, "This isn't finished." Robert replied, just as quietly, "I know." Fade to black. The commercial break began, but the tension didn't dissolve. It hung in the air like smoke after a fire, filling every corner of the studio. The audience was restless, murmuring in hushed tones, sharing glances that said the same thing. Did that really just happen? Robert sat back in his chair, hands pressed against his knees, heart still racing. He didn't relax. He couldn't. Something inside him had been stirred, ignited in a way he wasn't used to. Every interview had its challenges, yes, but none like this. None so personal, so raw, so public. Whoopi, meanwhile, stood near the side of the stage, arms folded, eyes scanning the audience. She exuded calm authority, but even her composed exterior betrayed a faint tension around the jaw. Both of them knew, unspoken, that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Backstage, the producers whispered furiously. The director barked instructions to the crew. But on stage, the energy had shifted irreversibly. This wasn't an ordinary interview. It had become a spectacle of human emotion, conflict, and honesty. When the cameras returned, the tension was palpable. The audience quieted immediately, some clutching their seats as if bracing for impact. Robert adjusted his jacket, clearing his throat, while Whoopi leaned slightly forward, her gaze unwavering. "Welcome back," Whoopi said, her voice calm but deliberate. "Before the break, we got candid, and I think the audience deserves some clarity." Robert exhaled softly, nodding. "I'll start. I didn't come here to argue, though it feels like that's what happened. I came here to talk about my work, my career, and yes, my experiences in Hollywood. I didn't expect to be judged for speaking honestly." A murmur ran through the crowd, half empathy, half awe. Robert's voice, even in its low intensity, carried an authenticity that demanded attention. Whoopi nodded slowly. "And I didn't come here to attack you. But I do believe in accountability, and I do believe that when you have a platform, your words have impact beyond your own perspective." Robert leaned forward, fingers lightly tapping the table, his voice calm but edged with emotion. "I understand that. I respect that. And I'm learning that. But I hope you understand my side too. How isolating it can feel when every move, every word, is dissected, assumed, and judged before it even leaves your lips." The studio fell silent. The tension, which had been spiraling upward like a storm, began to settle into something more reflective, almost cathartic. The audience was no longer holding their breath in suspense. They were listening. They were feeling it. "I do understand," Whoopi said quietly. "I see now that some of what I said came from assumption rather than understanding. And I respect your honesty." Robert let out a long breath, one he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Thank you. That means a lot." For a moment, the studio seemed suspended in a fragile balance, a truce formed not from agreement, but from mutual acknowledgement. Both of them had pushed, both had defended, both had revealed a side of themselves rarely seen in public. And in that raw honesty, there was respect. The audience broke the tension with applause, slow at first, then louder, almost cathartic. The cheers weren't for the clash. They were for the courage to confront, to speak, to listen. Fans who had come expecting a promotional interview now witnessed something far more human, far more real. As the show continued, the conversation turned back to Robert's latest project, but the shadow of the confrontation lingered. The questions now were softer, more nuanced. Robert spoke with the same intensity and thoughtfulness, but with a visible weight lifted from his shoulders. Whoopi moderated with a new lightness, her earlier edge replaced by a calm curiosity, occasionally acknowledging his points with a nod or a smile. Off camera, producers whispered about the viral potential of what had just occurred. Clips were already being recorded for social media, the tension, the words, the stares, everything that had made this more than just an interview. News outlets would cover it tomorrow. Twitter would erupt. Fans would debate every line, dissect every glance, analyze every pause. When the cameras finally cut to the closing segment, Whoopi addressed the audience directly. "What happened here today? It was a conversation, a confrontation, a revelation. And maybe that's what television should be more often. Real moments, raw honesty, courage to speak and to listen." Robert nodded. "I couldn't agree more. I hope people watching understand that it's not about conflict. It's about communication, respect, and the struggle every human experiences in their own way." The audience applauded once more, some standing, some visibly moved. The energy in the room was electric, different from the typical enthusiasm of celebrity interviews. This was admiration, for honesty, for courage, for vulnerability. After the show ended, the fallout was immediate and intense. Social media exploded with clips of the confrontation, viewers debating who won or lost, dissecting every tone, every pause, every phrase. News outlets ran headlines that ranged from Robert Pattinson clashes with Whoopi Goldberg to the day daytime TV got real, Robert Pattinson versus Whoopi Goldberg. Fans tweeted, posted, and shared their opinions in droves. Some defended Robert passionately, praising his honesty and emotional courage. Others defended Whoopi, applauding her insistence on accountability and perspective. Online forums lit up with analysis of body language, tone, and word choice. The incident became a touchstone for discussions about celebrity, privilege, communication, and the pressures of public life. Robert's publicist carefully navigated statements in the following days, emphasizing his focus on his craft and his gratitude for the conversation that unfolded. Whoopi herself addressed the clips in interviews, noting that the clash was a reminder of the importance of dialogue and understanding, even when perspectives clash. And yet, beyond the headlines and the social media storm, there was a quieter, deeper impact. Those who witnessed the moment, whether in the studio or online, felt it. The courage it took to speak honestly, the tension of being challenged, the respect found in listening, it left a lasting impression. For a brief, intense period, millions of viewers were reminded that even celebrities, people who often seem untouchable, experience pressure, frustration, misunderstanding, and the need to be heard. This was more than just a television moment. It was a human moment. And now, Stage View brings it directly to you. The confrontation, the tension, the emotional release. It's a story you witnessed with us in cinematic detail. But the conversation doesn't end here. We want to hear from you. What do you think about this explosive exchange? Was Robert justified in his words? Was Whoopi right to challenge him so intensely? Or is it somewhere in between, a complicated, human, messy truth that can't be summed up in black and white? Comment below with your thoughts. Share your perspective. And if you want more behind-the-scenes insight, more dramatic celebrity stories told in cinematic, emotional detail, make sure you subscribe to Stage View. Hit that like button, join the conversation, and stay with us for the moments the headlines won't fully capture. Because sometimes the story isn't just about who said what, it's about the emotion, the tension, the humanity in the space between words. And that's exactly what Stage View delivers. Intense, cinematic storytelling that lets you feel every moment as if you were right there in the studio, living it alongside the stars. The cameras are off, the applause has faded, the audience has gone home. But the story lingers. The echoes of that confrontation, raw, unfiltered, real, remain. And as viewers, you carry a piece of it with you. You witnessed a moment when two people, both brilliant, both flawed, both human, clashed in a way that was both tense and revealing. And that, perhaps, is the most unforgettable part of all. Because real stories aren't neat. Real stories aren't simple. Real stories make us feel. And here at Stage View, we bring you the stories that make your heart race, your mind race, and sometimes even challenge the way you see the world. Don't forget, share your opinion in the comments, subscribe to Stage View, and be part of the conversation. Dramatic moments like these aren't just for entertainment. They're for understanding, reflection, and connection. And the next story, it's coming soon. Stay tuned. The lights dim. The cameras stop. The confrontation ends, but the conversation continues.